In 1985, Dianne Stolberg was murdered inside a business in Richmond, British Columbia. No one has ever been charged. Nearly 40 years later, police say someone still knows what happened. This episode is about that unsolved killing and the silence that has kept it that way. In December of 1985, Richmond, British Columbia was not a place people associated with violence. It was suburban, industrial in parts, predictable in its routines. Dianne Stolberg was 21 years old. She was at her family's engineering business, a place she knew well, a place that was familiar, controlled, and assumed to be safe. This was not a remote location. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't somewhere a person would expect harm. There was nothing about that day or that setting that suggested it would end in violence. There were no warnings. There was no reported disturbance or indication that anything was about to change. That ordinariness matters, because when crimes happen in places like this, workplaces, family businesses, everyday settings, they leave behind a different kind of question. Not how someone disappeared, but how something so extreme could occur without drawing immediate attention. Whatever happened to Kim did not happen in isolation. It happened within walls people recognized, in a space others had reason to pass by. And that's what makes this case linger, not because of what's known, but because of what should have been seen, heard, or remembered by someone else who was there, or nearby, at the time. This wasn't a place where a person vanishes. It was a place where someone should have noticed something was wrong. At some point during that day, the routine ended. Inside the family's engineering business in Richmond, Kim was attacked. She was stabbed. The injuries were fatal. At the time, Kim had been on the phone with her sister, discussing plans for a surprise anniversary party for their parents. During the call, Kim told her sister that someone had entered the office whom she did not recognize and placed her sister on hold. She never returned to the phone. There is no indication of a public disturbance, no report of a struggle that drew immediate attention outside the building. Whatever happened unfolded quietly enough that it was not stopped in the moment. When Kim was found, it was clear that this was a homicide. Police treated the scene as a deliberate act of violence, not an accident, and not a medical emergency. Evidence was collected, the location was secured, an investigation began. What stands out is not just the brutality of the act, but the setting. This was not a deserted area. It was not an isolated roadside. It was a place connected to daily business and regular movement. The crime did not occur in the dark margins of the city. It happened indoors, in a space where someone entering or leaving might reasonably be noticed, before or after the fact. From the beginning, investigators understood that this was not a disappearance that needed to be explained. It was a killing that demanded answers. Who was there? Who had access? Who might have seen or heard something that day and never came forward? Those questions were present from the first hours of the case, and they have never fully gone away. From the outset, police treated the killing as a targeted homicide. The business was secured and processed as a crime scene. Investigators documented the interior, collected physical evidence, and established a timeline based on when Kim was last known to be there and when she was discovered. Attention focused on access. Who had keys? Who knew the layout? Who could enter the building without raising concern? Police spoke with family members, employees, and others connected to the business. They worked to identify who had been present that day, who was expected, and who may have been there unexpectedly. The surrounding area was canvassed. Investigators looked for witnesses who might have noticed unfamiliar vehicles, unusual movements, or sounds that seemed out of place only in hindsight. But this was 1985. There were no digital access logs, no surveillance cameras, no cell phone records to reconstruct movement minute by minute. The investigation depended heavily on memory, on people accurately recalling routine moments that, at the time, did not seem important enough to remember. Evidence was gathered, but evidence without context has limits. Without a witness, a confession, or a clear forensic link to a specific individual, the case could not advance to a charge. As time passed, leads were followed and eliminated. Some produced nothing. Others stalled without enough corroboration to move forward. The file remained open. What investigators were left with was not a lack of effort, but a lack of one final piece, a statement, an observation, or a detail held by someone who had never come forward. That absence shaped everything that followed. As the months passed, the investigation remained open, but active momentum slowed. There was no announcement of an arrest, no charge brought forward. The case did not end. It simply stopped producing answers. Like many unsolved homicides, it moved from daily police work into long-term review. This shift is procedural, not symbolic. Investigators revisit files, they recheck evidence, they reassess earlier assumptions. But without new information, the boundaries of the case remain fixed. What changes is not the importance of the crime, but the number of people talking about it. Witnesses move, memories dull, routine details, who was present, who left early, who arrived unexpectedly, become harder to place with confidence. Silence settles in gradually. Not all of it is deliberate. Some of it comes from uncertainty. People convince themselves they're misremembering, or that what they noticed wasn't important enough to mention. Other silence is more intentional. Someone chooses not to speak because it feels safer, because time has passed, because saying nothing has already worked. In cases like this, silence does not erase responsibility. It only stretches it across years. And as decades pass, the burden shifts, from investigators to memory, and from memory to conscience. That is how a case becomes cold without ever being closed. On January 29, 2026, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police made a renewed public appeal in the killing of Dianne Stolberg. Nearly 40 years after her death, investigators said the case remains active and unfinished. Staff Sergeant Jean Shea, Richmond RCMP's major crime commander, was direct about why police were returning to the public. 40 years have passed, but our commitment to finding answers for Kim and her family has not diminished, he said. Police emphasized that they were not relying on chance or nostalgia. They were relying on the reality that people remember more than they realize, especially when time creates distance from fear or consequence. Someone out there knows something, Shea said. The appeal was not framed around dramatic revelations or full confessions. Investigators stressed that even partial information could matter. Even a small detail, remembered now, could be the key to finding whoever was responsible for Kim's death, Shea said. Another investigator underscored that the case has continued to evolve, even without an arrest. This remains an active, ongoing investigation, and we're applying every contemporary tool we have, said Corporal Carlin Oates. But we still need the public's help. What police are acknowledging is simple. Time changes people. Someone who stayed silent in 1985 has lived decades since then. Circumstances change, relationships shift. What once felt impossible to say can feel different now. The appeal rests on that understanding. The case remains open not because it lacks history, but because it still depends on a choice, and that choice has not yet been made. Kim was 21 years old when she was killed in 1985. Nearly 40 years later, no one has been charged. Police have been clear about what they are asking for. Not certainty, not a complete story, but information, a memory, a detail that may not have seemed important at the time. If you were in Richmond in 1985, if you were connected to the business, or if you remember something that has stayed with you all these years, investigators want to hear from you. Time has passed, but responsibility does not expire. Someone still knows what happened, and this case will remain open until that silence is broken. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another Northern Dark episode.
Hello again, and thank you for listening to Kim's story. And this is one of those cases that doesn't leave you with a clean ending, but it does leave you with responsibility.
There's no resolution in the traditional sense, no charges, no trial, just an open investigation and a renewed appeal decades later.
While I was listening back to this episode, it kept reminding me of another case we've covered, the Melanie Carpenter case.
How so?
In that case, police identified a suspect and gathered evidence, but the justice system never reached a courtroom because the suspect died before charges could be tested. The process stopped because time ran out. With Kim, justice stalled for a different reason. not because the system couldn't act, but because someone never spoke.
So the outcome looks similar, but the reason isn't.
Exactly. One case ends because a suspect is gone. This one continues because information stayed silent. And that difference matters because it means this case still has a point of intervention.
Police have been clear about that. They're not waiting on new technology. They're waiting on someone to decide to speak. Time doesn't erase what someone knows. It just changes what it costs to say it.
And that's uncomfortable because silence isn't neutral. It shapes what justice can and can't do. Not saying anything is still a decision. And in cases like this, it's often the most powerful one. It's also important to say this clearly. You don't need to remember everything. Investigators are asking for what you remember, even if it feels incomplete.
Cases like this don't stay open because police stop caring. They stay open because someone hasn't spoken yet.
If you've been following Northern Dark, subscribing and sharing helps keep attention on cases that don't have easy endings. That attention matters.
And if you're someone who knows something about what happened to Kim in Richmond in 1985, the right place to act is with police, not online. Information doesn't have to be complete to be valuable. Thank you for listening to another episode of Northern Dark. We'll see you next Monday. And until then, take care of each other.